Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 2023 webinar, Taking Your Career to the Next Step here in Queensland. Before I begin, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land in which we're meeting today, which is here in Brisbane. It's the Turrbal people, and to elders past, present and emerging. Today, we're going to talk about all things relating to the job market here in Queensland. So I'm going to start off with some stats and figures around what we're seeing on the ground here before passing you over to my colleague Rachel, who's going to talk to you about preparing your resume and then working through the recruitment process. Next up is Renagi, who's going to talk to us about actually preparing for your interview. And then lastly, Madison, who's going to talk about that somewhat awkward conversation around actually resigning from your role and potentially handling a counter-offer situation. So starting off, I'm going to jump into some numbers and give you a bit of an idea of what we're seeing on the ground here in Brisbane. So what we're going to go through here is some data that we've got from Australian Bureau of Statistics. And the first bit of data we're going to look at is job vacancies for Australia, so Australia-wide. And as you can see on the screen there is a dip, and that is something that obviously we have experienced to an extent. Has to be put into context. So it's about 8.9%, I think, is actually published as a dip in the number of vacancies that have been listed as being put out in Australia during that time frame. So over the course of obviously a much longer term or back to the 80s, you can see it is a significant rise, even though it has dipped nationally. When you compare it to pre-COVID, which a lot of the bits of data do, so around February 2020, it is still significantly higher, so over 70%. But we have seen a bit of a fall off nationally around the number of vacancies that have been reported. It was an exceptional year last year, so I think it's probably not too surprising to some people, but in context, it is still very high for the number of vacancies. Moving on to the next slide. So this one's a little bit more interesting and obviously compared to the states. So if you can see the colours that are coming through, I've picked New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland to do a bit of a comparison. And as you can see, Queensland is actually the only one that does have a bit of an uptick. So everything's gone down that little bit. But if you're looking at the number of roles reported, we've actually had a bit of an increase. Even though it is a little bit quieter compared to last year, there has been a bit of a ramp up. So overall numbers, of course, New South Wales and Victoria is a fair bit higher than us. But it is interesting to see that it's not always the same as the national average. So there is a bit of individuality to the different states that we're seeing. The reason for the vacancies, so, and we do have a comparison, I have seen, we ran this event last year, so comparing it to 2022. Hasn't been a huge amount of change, and I should point out that this won't add up for any of the accountants out there. It's not going to add up to 100%, and it's because multiple reasons can be selected. So this goes out in a survey, and replacement and resignations is by far, of course, the one that's leading the way as the main reason. That hasn't necessarily changed a lot. I was saying about comparing it to last year, so that's still a level of churn that we're seeing that's fairly consistent. The increased workload is the major one that I say I've seen has changed compared to 2022. So that's been reported as a major for last year as a major reason for a new vacancy, where that's come off a little bit. So I think in general, what we're seeing is slowdown is off the back of that. So that sort of manic almost need to hire people because there's so much work coming through has cooled a little bit. And on the next slide, we can go into it in a bit more detail. So job mobility. What this is really showing is essentially turnover rate. So it is actually, as I was sort of alluding to, if you look at it across the years, how much are people actually changing roles? And obviously the impact for us in the recruitment market is that it creates, when someone leaves a role, creates a new role. It's actually very consistent, about 9.5%. So the turnover rate has remained the same. Everyone will be familiar with the term, the Great Resignation, which I know started more so around the US and expecting it to hit Australia. Talked about it last year, saying we're not really seeing it hit in such a huge extent as they were purporting. But it definitely is still a level of turnover that's quite high. So if you're comparing it to perhaps 2021 or even going back to 2018, it is still high. So we're seeing that people are perhaps not staying in roles as much as they used to, and there is quite still a significant level of turnover. This, I think, is my, as people that work with me will know, is probably my favourite bit of information around migration. So if you can see here the overseas migration, so people actually moving to Australia, New South Wales is by a huge extent. So if people are moving from overseas, they're going to move to New South Wales, then they're going to move to Victoria and Queensland. So that's pretty much the trend for people moving internationally. But what I think has always been very interesting, if you're an interstate migrant, so obviously people in Australia moving around Australia, in New South Wales, actually going backwards. So there's more people leaving New South Wales, which I think is very interesting to see. And then it's only really WA that are also gaining people interstate. If you also go into Queensland, and this isn't really a surprise to a lot of Queenslanders, is that, and this trend has been the same for the last couple of years, but it's really started to increase. I think this year is the number of people that are moving to Queensland is huge. There is a lot. And Brisbane is the fastest growing city in Australia. And it is because we do have a lot of people that are moving from the likes of New South Wales or Victoria. You would think that perhaps, right, there's been this massive influx of candidates, so it would be easy to fill a role if you had a vacancy. But what we're seeing is that a number of people, although they might be moving, with the increase in working from home and the ability to really have quite a lot of flexibility, is a lot of people just keep the job that they've got. So let's say, for instance, they work in Sydney, they're getting paid their salary there, and they're going to make a move to Queensland. House prices might have increased significantly, but they're still a lot cheaper than some of the house prices, certainly in Sydney and Melbourne. But they're able just to keep the role that they've got and work from home remotely. There's quite a large number of businesses that also have obviously different offices around the country, and you can have the option to work across those. And that trend has really meant that it doesn't mean that everybody that's moving to Queensland is having to look for a new job straight away, or even having to look for a new job at all. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing the house prices be under a fair bit of pressure. And also it is a challenge. And that's one thing, if you are considering a move here to Queensland, to find a property even as a rental. There's a dramatic shortage, and I really would suggest you look into that as best as possible, because it's certainly not an easy thing to do to find somewhere to base yourself at the moment. Unemployment rate. So everyone will be aware that there was a slight decrease, which is good news that just came out. It's not, I think, it'd be interesting how it plays out, because even though it has dipped ever so slightly, it's probably under a bit of pressure, I think, and it'll be very interesting how it goes into the new year. Nationally, you can see the rate there, but obviously for Queensland, that has dipped, by the way, for Queensland, but it is still relatively high. What some people are talking about in Queensland, which has been the case for maybe the last 6 to 12 months, is called the Great Employment Divide. So, and it's very typical for a capital city to have a much lower employment rate than perhaps driving out to Ipswich, for instance, say sort of half an hour, where you see that as you move out of the city, it increases. But for us here in Queensland, it is actually quite a dramatic shift. So it can as much as double the unemployment rate the moment you drive just within a short geography outside of that. And then, for instance, if you were to go to the Gold Coast, which when I saw those numbers, I must admit I was quite surprised to see that the unemployment rate is also very low on the Gold Coast. But it has to be remembered that there is a fair amount of construction work that happens on the Gold Coast, and also hospitality. again, if you're considering making a move to Queensland, and a lot of people, we see it, that, they see the beaches and think, right, I'll just go to the Gold Coast. I would just really do your research, because what you might find is that if you're looking to work perhaps in a corporate context, there's not that many head offices. So you might end up doing a bit of a commute if you are certainly looking to be in an office and in work here in Queensland. And the largest employing industries, so again, fairly consistent across the years. And some people are quite surprised by this, because they think Queensland is just going to be necessarily mining and resources. That is actually very much a staple of Queensland, and it is a big employer, but healthcare and social assistance has been a major employer, particularly around what we see in aged care. It's been a growth sector. Construction has definitely been happening, and we're trying to obviously push to cope with a housing shortage in coming through. So you can see as we're running through, there has been some changes across last year, but it's still relatively consistent with healthcare and social assistance being the dominant industry in coming through. So that's it, essentially, is wrapping up around what we're seeing. And I would say more anecdotally, what would be the major point that I would mention if you are looking for a role at the moment is, yes, it has come off a little bit, but it is still very busy in terms of candidates, short and difficult to find people. If you have any more questions, of course, you've got my details there. We are now going to pass over to Rachel, who's going to talk to us about preparing your CV.
Hey guys, I suppose one thing we do a lot of work with people is creating a resume with impact. So you're looking to move to Brisbane, you might not be known in the market up here, so how can you get your foot in the door? Resumes are a really tough thing to work with, and depending on where you're from as well, the information you need is different. But what we find consistently is resumes that are clean and concise are the absolute winners. So you might be wondering what's essential in your resume. The main things to see are, your contact information. You really only need your name and your email and your phone number, any qualifications and education that you have, a small profile, summarizing your history, what you're looking for, and what value you're going to be to a business, and then an accurate work history. The one thing I would suggest, and where we find people come undone as well, is if they've got a LinkedIn, is inconsistencies between what's on their LinkedIn and what's on their resume. So it's really important that you have the same information in terms of dates and titles there. When you jump into your work history, and we've got a sample there on the screen for you to have a look at of a nice, clean, easy to look at resume. When we're looking at the roles that you're doing, give us the date, the role that you've got, the company, those things go without saying. But then a snapshot's always really good to have. So what does the company do? Are they national? Are they international? Private, publicly listed, not for profit? And how do you fit into the company? So just 1 to 2 lines. And as you can see on this CV on the second screen, you have there, he gives a really good snapshot of the actual company, what they do, and how he fits in there, and the purpose of his role. You need then your responsibilities, and then really going forward, and I'm looking at things from an accounting lens, from my specialty there. The key thing to have there is going to be your achievements. So projects that you've been involved in, any cost savings you've identified for the business, or any efficiencies, any streamlining of processes that you've done. So, potentially for someone working in sales, it may be that you've increased sales by X amount through providing more face-to-face education with your customers on new products. For someone in accounting, it always might, it might be something along the lines of renegotiate the phone contracts on a national basis to reduce monthly costs, moving to one provider. So and how much it saves. So, something tangible there. Doesn't have to be an essay, just 1 to 2 lines there that gives the person looking at your resume something to talk to you about there. Next, when we're looking at CVs, it's really important to have things like the systems and software that you are using and your level of proficiency there. When we're recruiting accounting roles, we will quite often have clients wanting someone that has worked with their particular ERP or reporting tools that they've had. Just, it might mean less training for them, or it might be an industry-specific tool. What people a lot of the time want to see is, okay, are you going to understand our business, what we do, our structure, our reporting responsibilities? So what's going to, where can we find a candidate who's going to have the easiest transition into our business? The other thing, and I can't stress this enough, is consistent formatting and correct spelling and grammar. People are looking at reasons to not talk to you. So you need to make sure that you have your bachelor's spelled correctly. Is probably one thing that we do see all the time. And keep it clean. We don't need to see glary colors and zenny fonts, particularly if you're, say, working in accounting, maybe more in creative industry, but it needs to look professional and neat. Other things that are useful to have on a CV is your LinkedIn, but again, making sure it's consistent with what's on your resume as well. We've had people miss out on interviews with clients because they do go and check people out. If you're recently arrived or arriving in the country, it's really good, if you aren't here yet, to actually pop in your date of arrival and what your working rights are as well. So just so people can see that, okay, this person is serious, they're coming and they are able to work. A lot of businesses, unfortunately, may not have the capabilities to provide sponsorships. So, you don't want to discount yourself before you've even been looked at seriously. And something that gives a bit of a snapshot of who you are, hobbies, interests, any volunteer work that you do, that just shows a bit more about who you are as a person. There are some things that's really important not to have in your resume, or things that aren't helpful. Mostly it's going to be anything that opens you up to discrimination. So things like your marital status, your religion, gender, health, children, age, and your current and expected salary. Just keep it to the exact points that you need. And the other thing would be just trying to keep it to no more than 4 pages. You don't need to include your distant work history in detail, particularly if it isn't relevant to what you do now. So, 10 years into your career, we don't need to have 10 lines on the part-time role you held down in high school. As long as it's relevant to your career and it's in the recent history, great. But, say it's from 1990 and you worked in that role for 3 months, you don't need to worry about that. So what we've got here on the side is really, I suppose, some of those key points that we've spoken about here. And I get a resume is a very personal thing, and how you format it is going to depend on what industry you work in. And I primarily deal with accounting, so this is going to be more accounting focused. But as we see here, he's kept it concise. So we have his roles, we have how he's progressed within a business. We've got a snapshot of the company, his responsibilities and his achievements. At the top there, we've got the name, we've got the qualifications, how to contact him, a little bit about him and what he's looking for and what he offers, his key skills. And then, when we're jumping into the second page, it is jumping into his responsibilities, achievements. And then down the bottom, a little bit more about who he is as a person. In regards to your references as well, you don't need to provide names and details necessarily right away. Always handy, just protects your privacy a little bit more as well if you just pop available on request. I suppose that's really it. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My details are there on the screen, and happy to have a chat and see if we can be of help.
Great, thanks, Rachel. I think key thing there that I can see is around the snapshot. I couldn't agree more. As well as spelling mistakes, that's certainly something that we see a bit of. And For those that maybe find that a little bit challenging, then there's nothing wrong, obviously, getting a second opinion, whether that's someone who used to work with a mentor, or even just a family friend that say, can you have a look at this? Because there sometimes can be something that's quite glaring that you can't necessarily see. So thanks for that, Rach. And I know we've got a few questions coming through, and we will get to those just at the end of this presentation and make sure we respond.
No.
Thank you, Rachel. So we now got Renagi to talk about preparing for your job interview.
Thank you, Ben, and hello to everybody at home watching. So coming into the interviews and knowing you have an interview is a pretty stressful time, especially if there's a lot riding on the outcome of that interview itself. So taking the necessary steps, properly preparing for your next interview is crucial, especially to increase the chances of your success. So today, broken down my talk into two categories. These categories will be based on the more traditional tips. And the second one is based around some of the things people usually forget about that slip between the cracks that are equally as valuable moving into your job interview. As we know, interviews more often than not sometimes are crossroads for big life decisions. So they can be a gap filler until you prepare to go down that direct career path that you want. And then when you're at the other end of the spectrum, you're interviewing for that dream job. So they are very stressful times, and we know very well here at People to People how stressful it can be. So the first tip I want to stress to people is research the company that you're about to interview with. Find out exactly what they do, who are their leaders, and is there any kind of relevant news that has happened recently that might be, I guess you might be able to take that news into the interview to show that you are aware of what the company does and their movement within the industry. Second of all, take the job description, fully understand it, find out what are the key skills, what are the qualifications that are needed, what are the responsibilities. And then from there, understand where you personally align with them, and then you can showcase that side of yourself when your time comes to answer questions. Going into interviews, another thing is it's very hard to practice common questions or questions that are going to be asked in the interview. Like nobody here is a mind reader. So taking the time to understand each question, especially when you have been asked, take your time to digest it, understand, and answer appropriately. Circling back to potential questions, that could be anything from like the standard, tell me about yourself, why should we hire you, what is your greatest weaknesses? One thing that I learned from one of my colleagues, Mal Hammond, thank you very much, is the STAR approach or the STAR method, which is situation, task, action, and result. And then structure your responses effectively around that. So easily to find up, Google it, and you'll be able to see a big breakdown of the STAR method. From there, to show that you are ready, I would also look at preparing questions for the interviewer themselves. These can be anything from asking about the company's future, the team dynamics, and especially the company culture. One question that I do like to ask is when going into an interview is asking about the staff and how long that they've been there. It shows you the dynamics of the team and if there's a lot of movement, and it kind of gives you a bit of an idea of what the culture will be like on the back end of your question that you've asked. Lastly is dressing appropriately. I think that's a bit of a given, but understanding the role that you're interviewing for and dressing to that, So moving on from there, the second half of what I'd like to talk about today is some of the things people do forget and they miss when preparing for an interview. The biggest one that I can't stress to people enough is planning your route to get to the interview. People usually forget about it. Understanding what time of day your interview is on, finding out the direct route or what traffic is usually like. Sometimes even plan out the route or drive there or take public transport a couple of days before, just to know that you know the times that you will be able to get there effectively. If you can, aim to be there 10 to 15 minutes earlier just in case there's any delays. Another thing people do forget when in interviews, and sometimes, look, admittedly, I have a habit of really moving around when I talk to people, is mind your body language. In an interview, sitting there with your arms folded and shut down like that shows that you're not open, you're not engaging in the conversation. So nice and tall, sitting there engaging in conversation is great. Practicing good interview etiquette is another one. And I believe your interview starts the moment that you arrive at the complex. When you walk in, greeting everyone courteously. I know it's a given, but sometimes people get nervous and they forget about the little things. The eyes are on you the moment that you step into the complex. So like I said, be courteous to everyone you meet, from the receptionists, obviously, to the interviewers, because your behavior before the interview is also going to be observed by people around you, as well as people in the interview, and will therefore definitely make some impact on the hiring process and decision making. Lastly, this one here, I kind of threw it in at the end. It ties into what I was saying at the start of this talk today, is stay updated on the company itself. So brush up on the industry trends, any news that has happened recently in the company or within the industry. And if there's any relevant technical knowledge, this will definitely help you stay current and be handy during the interviews. Remember that interview preparations is not just about rehearsing answers, but also about presenting yourself as a professional who is genuinely interested in the company and the role. By following these steps, you can better position yourself for a more successful job interview. Thank you for today. I appreciate everybody listening in. If you do want to get in contact with me, my email address is renagi@peopletopeople.com.au, and my number's on the screen there, 0421 572 601.
Thanks, Renagi, and that was great. And also, I must admit, the comment around dressing appropriately, and also remembering that extends to being online, having a Teams or any sort of virtual interview, of course. And as you and I know, we've seen many people, that there can be some difficulties with that, but it's still an interview. Yeah. And I know there's some questions, and we'll certainly get to that around that. Sure. Lastly, we've got Madison talking about handling your resignation.
Thanks, Ben, and hello to everyone watching. So you've secured a new role and you're ready to resign. Here are some tips on how to manage your resignation and a counter offer if you're approached with one. So what's the best way to manage your resignation? Assess your reasons for leaving the role and ensure it's the right decision for you. For example, is the reason behind your resignation for career progression, a new challenge, a higher salary, culture fit, or more flexibility? Inform your supervisor or a manager before anyone else. You don't want them to find out through other employees. Schedule a private meeting with your supervisor to discuss your decision, and maintain a professional and positive attitude during this conversation. Now, how to be respectful during the resignation process. So you want to issue a formal resignation letter, keeping it concise and professional. Making sure to mention your last working day with the business, and make sure to give your employer the agreed notice period as per your contract. So that's typically sort of your 2 to 4 weeks notice. Express your willingness to assist in the transition process. So for example, training your replacement or providing guidance to colleagues who are taking on your tasks. If you can help it, avoid resigning during critical projects or busy periods, just to sort of alleviate the stress of the employer. Now, how to manage a counter offer if you're approached with one. So you want to be prepared for various reactions from your management and colleagues once you have resigned. So this could be, for example, some confusion as to why, you're leaving, disappointment, or, there could be excitement around you finding a new opportunity. Before considering a counter offer, think carefully about your reason behind resigning in the first place. Ensure your reasons for leaving has been addressed or can be resolved through a counter offer. Initiate an open and honest conversation with your employer. So explain your concerns and your reasons for considering leaving the company in the first place. Now, you want to have a clear idea of what you want in terms of improvements, whether that's a higher salary, better benefits, a change in responsibilities, or improved workload, and be ready to articulate these desires. Now, give thought about how accepting a counter offer might affect your long-term career goals and your relationship with the company. And just some data here. So data shows that candidates who accept a counter offer are usually back on the market within 6 months and have left the company within an 18-month period. Now, next, you definitely want to reflect on your experience resigning or going through the counter offer process. So use your resignation as an opportunity for personal and professional growth. Learn from your time at the company and take those lessons into future endeavors as well. Remember, the way you resign can ultimately impact your professional reputation. So it's important to handle the process with care and professionalism. And yeah, that sort of recaps everything that I wanted to discuss. Lastly, if you are looking for your next opportunity in Brisbane or have any further questions about what I've discussed today, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me by phone or email with the details on the screen. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Maddie. We've now got time for some questions. So I know there's been quite a few coming through, so we'll try and address a few of those just now. Perhaps starting off with one most recently. So I can see Raya, I've just put forward a question. Thank you for advice just regarding when is the best time, considering a move into state, I believe it is, around moving to Brisbane. So I would say typically we see a bit of influx, I must admit, in the new year. So that's usually with the market, it does start to quieten down probably in the next sort of 4 or so weeks. So I would say best time would be, if it's too close to Christmas, that's probably not the ideal, but certainly New Year, it's usually when Brisbane gets back and people are looking. So I'd either be looking now and have that window, or it's cut quite down over the next 3 or 4 weeks, or in the New Year. Another question that I'm just seeing coming through was in relation to Ava, and I think this is one more for Rachel around the CV.
Okay.
So see if we can get that up on the screen. If you want to tackle that one, Rachel.
I would, if you're doing a similar type of task, I would probably put the dates in that you started temping. So maybe not go into as much detail, but loop them together there. So you could say, 2020 to 2023, various temp assignments. Then you could, what I would probably do would be just to list some of the key ones, particularly if they have been longer term. So the dates, the role you were doing, and then the company, or vice versa there. But then just keep the snapshot of tasks and responsibilities and any achievements you've had in those just as like one role. So similar to what that resume that we popped up on the screen was there, he had that one job, but you could see at the top there was two different roles that he'd been in at different dates. So I would set it up like that, then just have general responsibilities there as well. We did
Great.
see.
And
sorry, I was just going to say, we did see a lot of I do this to you all the time. Did see a lot of candidates really fall into that temp trap over that COVID period there. So, it's I think, more widely accepted that may be on people's resumes now.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't be worrying about that too much.
No.
And I think that it's been quite common since COVID. And there's a question also from Olivia around healthcare industry, which be happy to take on. So as I was talking about, a lot of emphasis on the healthcare and advice around moving from something like finance, I would say it actually come back to a little bit what Rachel's talking around the resume and looking at the synergies. So if you're an accountant, for instance, in a construction industry versus moving into healthcare, it's just thinking about, there's probably more synergies than you might know, but thinking about what are the key things in each industry and trying to make sure you demonstrate that as best as possible. For something like finance, it should be quite transferable. So really highlight those areas. Have a look at, the ads that are coming through in healthcare. Have a look at some of the position descriptions. What are the key reoccurring things that you think, well, actually, I am doing that in my current role, but there might not be an emphasis in it because it's a slightly different industry. And I would say that there are a lot of people that have transitioned from something as different as mining into healthcare. We saw a big switch a few years ago, people moving, and that really wasn't so much of a challenge. Used to get stuck with, you must have industry experience, but I would say that's actually come off a bit. In a candidate short market, it's been a lot easier to make that transition. And we might have time just for one more question. I'll just see what we've got here. Max got a question around interview. We'll take this one, Ranagi. Oh, you're on mute there, I think.
My apologies. There we go. Virtual, in person. Yeah, see, it's very easy to go straight to virtual. I think in the mask of COVID has pushed everyone away from that human face-to-face interaction. So I understand when people want to gravitate straight to the virtual online interviews. But the element that you miss out on, like I said before, is that personal face-to-face interaction. You get to understand the person a little bit more. And I think it sounds a bit weird, but it's more of a genuine conversation when you're sitting 2 feet away from someone as opposed to between a computer screen. So as much as long-winded answer, as much as it's good to and safer to be in a virtual interview, I would definitely look at trying to do those face-to-face if you can. Be a lot different to everybody else.
Yeah, great. I think that's great advice. And I think that there are obviously a lot of people that are moving interstate, and typically that would be an allowance saying not going to expect you to fly into Queensland just for a first round. But typically we see that the first round would be, if you're making a relocation, it would be virtual, and then obviously face-to-face. But there is something that I agree with you, Renago, around your comments of body language. There's certainly something that is lost on the virtual side, but it's still relatively widely accepted. So we do have some other questions. We'll make sure we do get back to you. I'm not sure we've got any time for more to come through, but everyone that has asked a question, I do assure we will make sure that you will get a response. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. It's been great, and we look forward to assisting you in the future. Thank you.